Well, we're talking about a 4-6 UCF team, but it's not all negative, which many of you have asked. We're going to talk positives and negatives, and if Gus Malzahn is going to be the coach of this team moving forward. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Charge On. As always, I'm your host, Sean Green. Before we get started, a quick word from our sponsor, Bet.Online. Bet.Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet.Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to the web BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. It's bye week, second bye week of the season. Weird time for a bye week. Weird time. We thought before the season this would be the perfect time for a bye week. You know, go through a tough stretch of games, get a perfect bye week to end out the year, finish your 2 games. It kind of is. It kind of is because you have 2 final games for a bowl game. But we'll get into all of the bye week positive and negative talk. I'm not in my normal setup. I'm on a work trip. Going to be on a lot of work trips in the next month. So positives and negatives to that. But Nick's in his usual spot. He gets to stay home. So how's your bye week treating you, Mr. Geddes?
It's great so far. It's kind of weird we don't have a game to preview today, or anything to look forward to, I guess, as well. I guess we have other college football that we'll be tuned into and stuff like that, but I think it is a much needed break. It's been a whirlwind of a 5-6 week period we've been on here. So I think a break for all parties involved is actually, this is the best time for it.
We get the break, and then you get 2 straight weeks, and then the way it's looking like is it's going to be done. So we've got a lot to discuss. And listen, I want to come out here and say we're going to try to keep this under 30 minutes per usual. But we have gotten comments over the last couple weeks, and I think it's there's been a little bit of a back and forth between certain UCF fans that are all doom and gloom and certain UCF fans that are trying to find the positives every week. And I would say that for the most part, again, we try to keep it 100, as they say. We try to keep it what we see. We try to say what the positives are. Me and Nick felt that on the last episode. We thought we were positive in some of the areas. But again, I think when you lose certain games like UCF has lost over the last 2 years, sometimes it just gets really old. So this episode really, it's for both parties. It's for the UCF fans that want to talk the positives, and it's for the UCF fans that just want to talk negatives, because you get both of it. And if you want to just talk about Gus Malzahn and, we'll talk about it over the top. Let's not bury the lead here. We'll talk about Gus Malzahn off the top, because I think that is something that everybody wants to know about. Everybody wants to hear what's going on. I'm not going to say me and Nick don't have intel. We have intel that we are not going to say, and that's not trying to keep things. I think there's been a lot of retirement rumors, Nick, over the last week. I think that me and you were under the impression, and we kind of just assumed that if Gus Malzahn somehow got to a bowl game, got to 6-6, that he would stay. That he would stay as the coach of UCF. He would continue to build this thing. He'd get kind of one more year to really see. It seems like the noise has started to kind of get louder and louder among the fan base that there is some smoke around Gus potentially stepping down and, not being the coach of UCF next year. What do you think for both parties, right? If you're Gus Malzahn, do you want to coach UCF next year? Do you think this is something you want to continue doing? And for UCF, do you think that this is time for new leadership? Are you looking for a new coach, or do you want to see kind of Gus Malzahn get one more year, one more crack at coaching?
I think we had been saying the entire year, like the Gus Malzahn, should he or should he not be fired thing, I think that was starting. There were some areas I felt like that was coming even before the season, no? I feel like we were having to answer questions a little bit about that before the season. And then obviously it just ramped up throughout the losing streak. And I would say we were generally on the side of, listen, they're not going to fire him. You can chant and shout and and you could boo him all you want. He's not going to get fired because they're not paying the $12 million buyout. It's just not going to happen. And it would probably be best to give him one more year to sort it out. And if he doesn't, then what will happen? What will happen is he probably then would not return as the head coach of UCF. But yes, there have been a lot of rumors running around about, could Gus step aside and retire? Could he work something out in regards to his buyout and try to, for lack of a better way of saying it, depart in an easier way, from a financial standpoint for UCF, and then obviously from a perception standpoint too. So we're certainly on watch for that. We don't know what's going to happen, me or you. We really don't know. But we'll see what happens. But it just seems like, and of course, to touch on just real quick about, the people that say that it's just been too negative and things like that. It comes from a place of there were higher expectations on this program coming into the year, not just from me, not just from you, not just from the fan base, but from Gus Malzahn himself. And when we get to this point in the season where it's mid-November and they're sitting at 4-6, and you look at all the things that have gone off the rails so far this year, I mean, yeah, it's hard not to focus on why that's gone wrong. There have been some positive things. We're going to get to them for sure today. But in terms of Gus Malzahn, why should he want to stay? I mean, that question is interesting, Sean, because you have to look at the talent that you're going to be able to retain next year. And you got to look at the talent that you have on the roster that's going to be here next year for sure. And we really never know in this era of college football, by the way. We don't know the answer to who's going to be here, who's not going to be here. And the one thing we always said and we could point to about Gus Malzahn was what he was doing on the recruiting trail and the buzz that UCF had as a program in that category. And as we sit here today, UCF has pretty much watched what was tracking to be their best class ever fall apart pretty quickly. It's fallen apart pretty quickly. And it's not like you look around and there's just a bunch of uncommitted guys who are considering UCF or you still have a shot and things like that. I feel like what you have right now is what you have. In fact, you're probably more likely to lose guys than probably keep guys. And I hate saying that, but they've fallen all the way, I think, to 61st in the recruiting rankings. That's right back to American Conference level recruiting, Josh Heupel era level recruiting. And that's not why Gus Malzahn was here. And to be fair, that's not what he's been since he's been here. But that's where it's at now. So if you're Gus Malzahn, he's not getting any younger. You're looking around at the program 4 years in. There hasn't been the progress to the speed, I think, at which everybody thought that it was going to be at. And now the recruiting class is sort of falling apart. And a lot of the best players and the best parts of this team are not going to be walking back through that tunnel next year in a UCF uniform. And how much success are you going to have because they're going to have to go into the portal? How much success can you realistically expect to have there? Can you sell that to the fan base? I mean, there's a lot of questions there for Gus Malzahn to answer. And so there's not really an easy answer to that. But I would just say that if you put all those factors together, if there was a scenario where Gus said, you know what, I think it's best for me to go, then, I mean, that could be on the table.
Yeah, and we are not bearing the lead in terms of we have no idea what is actually going to happen. We have heard both things. We have heard that he's going to leave. We've heard that he's going to stay. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. What we do know, and I think I said it on our last show, is I think everything is fluid right now. I think genuinely the way the season ends is going to kind of determine how the program moves forward. I do find it interesting, the recruits that UCF is losing. Not so much that it didn't seem like they were looking elsewhere or whatever, but usually when stuff like this happens, there's a chance that these certain players believe that either their position coaches are not going to be there, or they get paid more money, or the head coach is most likely going to be gone. So I think the recruiting class down to 12 players. So yeah, it's not great. The season hasn't gone the way that anybody wanted it to. And when you couple that with the recruiting, it's a huge storm that nobody really wants right now.
And I was going to say, too, to the recruiting point, because both the Desir brothers just committed to Florida State. I think that came down before we last
They
spoke,
did, but
maybe.
then they deleted it. It's weird. Like they committed, but then they deleted the post.
Well,
So,
they might have. Okay, so this might have happened before Florida State decided to axe or fire Adam Fuller as their defensive coordinator. So I don't really have my timeline necessarily together on that, but I'm pretty sure they announced that they were decommitting and then committing to Florida State the day before Fuller was fired. So maybe they're having second thoughts. I don't know. But my point was saying that
they're probably not. They're gone from here.
If they're gone from here, they're probably not just going to be like, "Oh, sorry, we're coming right back, guys. Please welcome us in." I don't think that's happening. So let's just consider them gone for the moment. And because they said it, let's assume that it's Florida State. So you have 2 recruits that go to Florida that are, we think, committed now to Florida State. And Florida State's in the middle of the worst year they've had since the pre-Bobby Bowden era. One of the biggest collapses ever. They just fired coordinators. And so you're losing recruits to them. Now I get it. It's Florida State. It's a brand. But again, there's not much of a selling point there right now. And then consider the fact that the one guy that you've been able to keep so far, who committed to you back in, June, July, Javon Boggs, who we've been sort of saying, like, this is a legit top 250 player in his class and can make a difference maybe in year one, especially when you look at the state of the receiver room going forward. And now, he's taken visits to Florida State. Florida State has got no receiver commits in their class. He's like their last hope, essentially. So now you're going to have to fight really hard to retain that. And both sort of programs have, these uncertainty and around them. So I just think when you consider it like that, I don't think you're guaranteed to keep Boggs at this point. I really don't. I don't think it's guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed in this day until we get to National Signing Day. But that's just the little spiel there on recruiting of where it's at right now.
No, you're not guaranteed to keep him at all. I mean, there's one key difference between both these programs right now. Mike Norvell is not scared that he's going to lose his job. Gus Malzahn.
No, he's got 65 million reasons not to be scared.
Exactly. So it's a little bit different in terms of head coach placement. If I'm a player, I care more about my head coach and who is at the front of the head of the table than the position coaches. The position coaches recruit the players, and though there is kind of that, it's a lot closer of a relationship with the position coaches and the players compared to the head coach and the players. But and to be fair, Florida State they fired the receiver coach too, Ron Dugans, who I don't know if he's the primary recruiter for Boggs, but I'm going to assume so. Well, I know like Gus is one of the primary for Boggs. Like he worked really hard to get Boggs as well as Tim Harris Jr. So it's like all those questions are going to get asked. Like if Gus gets fired, Tim Harris Jr. is gone, and all of the position it's going to change a lot. So just be ready for anything. We've got 3 weeks of craziness. Granted, we're recording this on Tuesday. This is getting released on Friday. I don't know. I don't think anything's going to happen this week. Like we've said, everything is fluid. But if I had to put a percentage on it, I would say right now I lean 60% Gus going, 40% Gus staying. It kind of feels like the last week or so that's kind of the thought process. But we'll move on from that. Let's talk about the team at hand that we've been kind of watching play, the team that Gus Malzahn is coaching. 4-6. Again, you have 2 games to get to a bowl game. Let's talk positives. Let's talk positives first. I think, to be completely frank, before these last 2 games, there wasn't many positives. Like, you couldn't really give positives on the year. And I know, again, the group that really wants us to talk positives maybe doesn't like to hear that, but that's just the truth.
Well, if we're going to talk positives, we have to start with the I guess if you want to touch on the obvious, it's RJ Harvey. I mean, I've been telling people for weeks, just enjoy watching that dude run the football in a UCF uniform as long as you can, because we got two, maybe 3 games tops left of it, and the legacy he's leaving behind at that position is going to be hard to top. It's going to be hard to top. So RJ Harvey, he's just a treat to watch every single year. Obviously Kobe Hudson, whose numbers probably should be a lot better than what they are, to not any of his fault, by the way. I think that's stating the obvious of why they are what they are. They're still solid, but he probably could have been back to around the 1,000-yard plateau if the quarterback position had been sort of figured out. But he's been a constant presence. I'm sticking on the offense. I figure we can go offense, defense.
Yeah.
I think the offensive line in general, from a pass blocking standpoint, I'm not going to give them much on a run from.
They've been awful with the run, so that's negative.
Yeah, they have not been great with the run, and we've talked a lot about how RJ Harvey, what he's doing behind that line is incredible. But I actually think they've really come on even through the tough stretches there. I really thought the offensive line started to turn a corner. It's kind of interesting. Like when KJ was the quarterback, I thought the offensive line was not doing him any help at all. And maybe it's the fact that they had quarterbacks who were more mobile, and maybe that's hiding some of it. But I generally have thought they've played a lot better down the stretch. Not outstanding by any means, but I just think they've been better. So I think that unit's been there. We've seen Jacoby Jones come on now. So I think there have been some positives throughout on the offensive side of the football, even as it's been dysfunctional there during that losing streak.
Yeah, I'll say I agree with you on there. RJ Harvey, that's the most obvious answer we'll give this pod. I will say Dylan Risk. Well, that he's come on late, and he's got an opportunity. Like I said on the post-game pod from Arizona State, I think these next two games are going to be really big for him. If he can keep stacking really solid performances, I think it'd be crazy to not think that he'd be quarterback one heading into next year. Now, again, I don't think it's wrong to not just. I think it's easy for people just to crown guys when they get a glimmer of hope, like, oh, okay, he's clear-cut QB1. I'm not there yet, but I think he's shown every bit of potential that you want to see in these first two games, and he's been the bright spot in the quarterback room. Tim Harris Jr. calling plays. I mean, again, the first 8 games were brutal. I mean, you were questioning play calls left and right. And with Tim Harris Jr., you kind of can see the difference. You can see the way he's calling certain plays in certain down and distances that make sense. Now, a lot of people like to criticize some of the play calls in the last game, but I think those were few and far between compared to some of the decisions that Gus was making calling plays for the past 2 years. And I think the final real bright spot, you mentioned Jacoby Jones. I'd say Miles Montgomery in brief stints. I think Miles Montgomery is poised and ready to have a bigger role next year. And I think that's where UCF fans, regardless if they get, a running back in the portal or not, I think you could feel really good about Miles Montgomery being your starting running back. I think he's shown a lot. I think whenever he comes in, he just brings a different level of energy. It's infectious. It gets, as a person watching the games, it gets me pumped up for him when he gets to carry the rock. So I think yours coupled with mine, I think I think that's a good amount of positives. I think the offense has shown a lot in the last 2 weeks, and there's been specific bright spots where you can feel like Miles Montgomery and Jacoby Jones, if they are on the roster next year and they carry over, you feel good about those two guys heading into next year, along with Dylan Risk potentially, as a good offensive tandem moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, if the quarterback position had been figured out before, the 8th game of the season, the 9th game of the season, whatever it was when Risk got in there, was it the 9th game? I think Arizona was the 9th game.
Yeah.
If it had been figured out before then, I think that's always going to be, everybody's going to ask themselves, what if, what if? And everybody looks at the numbers of where UCF ranks offensively, and they're still near the top of the conference. And even if you take away the top two, or the first 2 games rather, because I know that's probably going to be the rebuttal. Well, what about that? Is that being propped up by the first 2 games? I believe if you actually take those games away and you take away the 2 cupcakes they usually play in the 4 years Malzahn's been here, and then you do the points per game, this year's no different than the other 4 years. So you don't really have to make that argument, is what I'm saying.
This is a 2-game season. If you really look at it and I know it's not, and I know I'm naive to say that, the first 8 games you kind of have to throw away. You kind of have to, because you could take the roster and the construction of the roster, But the last two games have been so vastly different in how the game is called after the coordinator change and after the quarterback change that it is a completely different offense. It is. The way it's called, the way it's run.
Well, it's just more how smooth it looks, and the fact that they have a true threat with the pass now, and how much that's helped RJ Harvey in these last two games, and your running backs, and what it's done getting Kobe Hudson involved, and obviously the emergence of Jacoby Jones and Randy Pittman as well, who I was calling for all year to get him the football more, and good things tend to happen, and they have when they've gotten him the football here lately. So I think that's just been the difference. It's like you said, you almost have to set that 8 games that they had was like a completely different season. And then the last 2 games on offense, when you have a quarterback who is able to get the ball out on time and be able to, not perfect necessarily, but just be able to play decent to good at the position. I mean, it's changed so much.
Yeah, and again, I know not many people are talking about this, but we kind of mentioned it on our live watch along how I know Gus likes the extra element of a quarterback run game, right? That's why he brings in Jakari in the red zone, because it's just a different element. And I know Dylan doesn't really have that extra element. He can run, but he's not as versatile as quarterbacks that Gus has had in the past. But you notice, even without that extra part of a quarterback, when you have a guy that can move the ball, it opens up your offense. You don't need to have a quarterback that can just gash defenses with the run, because he'll beat somebody. Like there'll be a play in the game where he will be able to use the run game. And I think that's kind of what's played Gus Malzahn, and we'll talk about that in the negatives. But I've loved how the offense has been kind of trending, and that's kind of all of the positives. And I think that's a good amount for 2 games. It's a watchable offense that you feel good about moving the ball. You don't feel that if you have 40 seconds left, this offense has no shot. You feel like the offense can hit a couple big plays and go score. Let's talk positives with the defense. I'll start. I think, especially these last 2 games, I've loved what Addison Williams has done. I never thought I would say that, to be completely honest with you. I think you've seen how he's grown, how he's called the game. He mixes up certain blitzes. It's not 10 yards back on every single play. He's still not giving up really big chunk plays, and if they are, it's bad technique by the corners, which, again, we can get into. I think Deshaun Pace, I'm still going to put him in a positive category. He's fallen off, as the season has gone on, but I think he's still shown like he is an NFL-type guy with how he plays the game of football. You can put him in many different positions. You put him as a linebacker, you can kind of put him as a guy that can watch the quarterback. And then I'd say the next one for me would be the young guys. I've liked what I've seen out of Isaiah Nixon. I think Isaiah Nixon, if he stays, is going to be a baller for UCF. Now, granted, I said that about Malachi Lawrence, and I've said that about multiple guys at the edge position, and it's bit me. I think Chasen just honestly needs a little bit more work. He's gotten called on a couple PIs, a couple of holds here and there, but I think ultimately for an undersized corner to be going up against some pretty good receivers with a lot of experience, I think he's played pretty well. So I'd say the young guys and DP. But what would you say positives for defense?
I start with Dalen Dotson. Ever since they moved him to edge, I think he's been the best player on defense since they moved him back to his natural edge position. I think that's fair to say. He brings good energy. He gets to the quarterback. Remember the first 4 or 5 games where UCF couldn't buy a sack at all? And Dalen Dotson, I think, is up to 4 sacks this year, which is tied for the team lead. And he hasn't played in his natural position for a majority of the season. So I love what I've seen from him this year. And another guy who I think he's had a sneaky, solid season, and it's gone under the radar. And of course, we probably could have mentioned him more than we have all year. I think Mac McWilliams has actually been really solid. I think he's been really solid. I actually think he's been your best cover corner all year. I really do. I thought he had a great game against Arizona State most recently, but I think you've continued to see him making the jump from UAB to this level. I think as the season has gone on, I think you've seen him to, sort of grow into the defense, and I think he's been the number one corner. I think he's made some really good plays. So Mac McWilliams, to me, definitely is on the positive list. You already mentioned Deshaun Pace. I'll mention X-Ree Alexander and the opportunities that he's gotten. He's another guy who he's got some term left here at UCF, hopefully. So that's another guy that you hopefully can just plug right back into the middle of your defense next year. Should make a lot of plays, make a lot of tackles, all those things. You mentioned Nixon. We had a stretch there where Isaiah Nixon was coming on. Outside of that, I mean, it may be harder to find individual positives. I mean, listen, I think you could say as a group, they've generally done well against the run.
They've been the most steady group this entire year.
Yeah, stopping the run, that's been the best part of them probably the entire year, like you said. And so I will say maybe you haven't seen the big plays that maybe you were expecting from Malik Hunter or Ricky Barber, but they're in the middle. They're clogging up running backs and clogging up the holes and everything that they're there to do. They've both been great ambassadors for the program, both of those dudes, and they're going to be missed next year regardless. So I think those are a few positives you can put on the defense.
All right, we talked a lot of positives, and I'm going to be honest. We could spend an extra 30 minutes talking about negatives. You've heard all of our negatives. You have. And I'm going to try, like we said, we're going to try and keep this under 30 minutes. It's not going to happen, but we're going to try and keep this brief because ultimately, a negative show, we could talk for an hour. Let's just be honest. Gus Malzahn is a big negative. Nick mentioned it, and we're not going to go offense-defense. We're just going to talk in generalizations because there's a lot of negatives. But I think the one constant has been Gus Malzahn this year. You can't promise and come into the season promising, potential Big 12 championship aspirations and saying everything last year was so ridiculous and it's not going to happen again and follow it up with this type of season. I think the hiring of Ted Roof, we all talked about it. That was his decision. Taking play calling duties back, that's his decision. You can blame this season and most of its negatives on Gus Malzahn. Now, players have to go execute. Players have to go play. We're not going to sit here and act like it's all on coaching. But a lot of the issues have been straight up coaching.
I don't disagree with you. Clearly, if you've listened throughout as the year has gone on, I've gotten increasingly more critical of Gus Malzahn, okay? But we already know that. If we could put it in its simplest form, Sean, and this I guess you could put on Gus as well. The biggest disappointment is KJ Jefferson. Let's get that out of the way. The biggest disappointment is KJ Jefferson because everything that Gus Malzahn talked about in the offseason and that we talked about in the offseason and why there was reason for optimism that you could compete in the Big 12 this year. I mean, hell, we said 8 wins. Can you get me 8 wins? 2 more than you did last year. And it's hard to do. It is very hard to win football games, especially in the Big 12 this year, because everybody, is just cannibalizing everybody all year. But a lot of that hope and optimism was the fact that we saw, hey, here comes an SEC quarterback who's played at Arkansas and been the starter for the last 3 years, and he led the SEC in passing a couple years ago. Here he comes in. He doesn't really turn the ball over much. He's a Gus Malzahn prototype. He's built in a lab for Gus Malzahn's offense, and he's going to take this offense to the next level. Everything's finally in place for everything to go to the next level. You could talk about the defensive stuff, the Ted Roof hiring. I mean, did we really have crazy expectations for the defense? Probably not. We figured that UCF was always going to be offense first, and that's what was going to be their ticket. And Sean, from the first time we saw KJ Jefferson throw a football in a UCF uniform, it was a telltale. It was a telltale, Sean, that, man, he just doesn't have it here. Now, I don't know the reasons why it didn't necessarily work out here. And by the way, to point at, I will point this out though, KJ Jefferson, even though he was benched, he was still a team captain. He showed up every single day since then. He's mentoring the young guys on this football team, specifically EJ Colson, who posts a lot of photos on social media with him and KJ. So this is nothing personal against KJ. I think if KJ wanted to, he could have stepped aside and it would have been it. But KJ Jefferson has continued to lead by example. He's been a great servant for the program since he's been here. So I got nothing but positive things to say on that front of him. But from a performance standpoint, when you're brought in for the amount of money that he was brought in and with the amount of hype that he was brought in and for an offense that was supposedly tailor-made for him to be benched after 5 games, I think KJ Jefferson's probably the biggest disappointment of the season.
He could have pulled a Tommy Castellanos. I mean, he could have.
How about that, man? How about that?
I mean, don't you remember every UCF fan was crying? And now look at him. So, credit to KJ. I mean, it does take, honestly, a real man, a real teammate to do what he's doing right now, because I think
it's got to be killing him. It's got to be killing him not to be playing.
I mean, I think we just push it off to the side, but what he's doing and how good of a teammate he's being, it shows his true character, and I think all UCF fans should applaud him for kind of how he's handled the situation. Besides that, negatively, again, I'm not trying to go deep into this. We've seen the negative. We know what they are. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. I don't want Charge On to get the notion that we just want to crap all over the team, but it's been bad. I mean, you can go down the list. I mean, Jakari Brown was a negative. If you want to say KJ, I think Jakari's a negative. You paid another guy to kind of be the starter next year, and definitely he's not going to be your starter. He's shown signs of positive stuff with the quarterback run game and the red zone. With Dylan as your starter, I think I like that. I don't think it's enough for him to come back next year. The mismanagement of EJ Colson and that whole situation.
Bizarre.
Really bizarre.
I was going to say, too, I know he's tied. He's tied with Dotson for the team lead in sacks, but I think we were expecting some more disruption by Malachi Lawrence coming into the season. It's just sort of been in spurts. So I don't know if I want to say he's been a disappointment. I probably would put him somewhere in the middle. And honestly, to be honest with you, the middle portion there is probably the largest. It's always going to be the largest portion. I'm not going to go player by player and put everybody in a box, and that's not what this was meant for. But I'm just saying, I think there's a lot probably somewhere in the middle. Probably too much, and that's why they are closer to average than they are good, to be honest with you. But it's been a strange season the way this is sort of unfolded. It's been storyline central. It never ends with this team. But we got two more left. We got two more games. We'll see. I didn't think I'd say this, but I am looking forward to the final 2. I am looking forward to them, regardless. Is it weird that I have this growing belief that UCF is somehow going to win these last 2 games?
I have 0% chance or 0% confidence.
Is it weird that I'm sitting there at that point right now?
It is, because you've been way more positive than me this season. So it's definitely.
Have I now?
Yeah, you've gone on my level as the season's gone on, but before week 4, you were definitely way more positive than me.
I thought they were gonna I remember going into the TCU game, I said, I have this feeling that UCF's just gonna go out and just rout them. They're just gonna go out there and rout them. And that didn't happen. They won the game, but it did not go down in the way I thought. And then I picked them to beat Florida and Colorado, I believe. I picked them to win both of those, did I not? I think I was I think after the Florida game, I hit my breaking point.
Yep.
Which is crazy, because they were still 3-2 at that time.
Yeah.
With everything to play for. And I don't know if it's the fact that we were in Gainesville for that as fans.
Maybe.
And it was just as bad as it was. And that was where I just maybe flipped a switch. But up until then, I had held out optimism.
I give myself a lot of credit being in Gainesville and still picking Florida, because usually, you know me, I'm usually all of the atmospheres usually get to me. But this season, you
bought into all the hype.
Yeah, no.
Bought into all the hype. Isn't it amazing though? As we're going to tie a bow on the season soon, but I know you got to go. But I'll just say this: isn't it funny? It feels like, remember Big Noon Kickoff and the excitement that we had for that game?
That felt like yesterday. I felt like forever ago.
That felt like forever ago for me. Like that was a different time period. That was a different time.
I think it's weird.
2 months ago.
I think the TCU game felt like forever ago, but Big Noon for some reason felt like yesterday, and I don't know why. It's just how my mind weirdly works.
I feel like after they beat TCU, I came on here and said that, okay, the Big 12 is starting to separate itself, and UCF is in the top 5. I said that.
Yeah,
I said that. And then remember the odds makers, the 14-point favorites against Colorado, Big Noon kickoff, all that stuff. Wow. Like and then you just think about everything, and then you just think about everything that happened since, and it's like, wow, how did we get here? How did we get here?
Well, listen, I have a feeling that just like usual UCF off seasons, this next month I think is about to be a little crazy. I think it's about to be crazy. Don't know what's going to happen, but
I think it's the most important offseason in modern UCF history.
Yeah, it is. I wouldn't disagree with that. You got 2 more games left on your slate. We'll talk West Virginia next week, who I'm assuming Garrett Green will play for that one. I know he was out. I don't know if he's going to play Saturday. I know he was practicing, but I think by all assumptions he will be playing against UCF. So we'll talk West Virginia next week. Got 2 more games, and then all of your positive and negative energy can be pushed into either a bowl game or coaching hiring or, assistant hiring for Gus being able to stay on the, who knows?
One thing at a time.
One thing at a time.
But until then, everybody enjoy your bye weeks. Everybody enjoy your bye weeks.
Watch some Magic basketball.
Don't do that.
They play tonight against the 76ers. Watch that.
Isn't Orlando City like the highest ranking team left in the Eastern Conference in the playoffs?
Well, the Orlando Pride. Oh, yes, they are. And the Orlando Pride is they haven't lost, or they lost 1 game or something like that. I gotta check that out. But all right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to Charge On for your bye week coverage. Hopefully, we were positive enough for you. Hopefully, we didn't delve into too much negativity. This pod. We always, and I want to be very clear, we always love constructive criticism. We always love it. We don't mind it. If you ever have a thought on what you want to see or hear more out of us, we genuinely want to hear it. So no harm, no foul there. We hope that some of the fans that wanted a little bit more positivity got it, and some of the fans that want the negative get the negative from us every week. So it's a good mix. But please like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that you do. We greatly appreciate it. For Nick Geddes, I'm Sean Green. This has been Charge On, presented by Bet Online. We will see you next week.